Once again, if you guys like the content they're providing, be sure to subscribe today to the channel so you don't miss any of the upcoming action. We have just wrapped up the 109th edition of the Indianapolis 500. We have the NHRA Thunder Valley Nationals from Bristol, Tennessee coming up in a few weeks that we're going to be at live. But between then, I believe, is Epping. And then we have another off week for Richmond. And then we're back in Norwalk. So we have a lot of cool things coming up here in the summer months of the NHRA Tour. So if you want to stay up to date with everything, subscribe down below so you don't miss any of the action, courtesy of our friends over at Peak Performance, who are funding our summer tour of the NHRA season. And without further ado, let's get into the video.
Number one, next time by 13 laps to go. Definitely trying to get
So we've just wrapped up the 109th running of the Indianapolis 500, and I don't really know what to make of this race. There was a lot of things that went right. There was a lot of things that went wrong. But in the end, I don't think anybody was really too surprised by the winner, but maybe surprised by the way he got there. Tell us a little bit who won this race and what the hell happened today.
Well, if you haven't watched the IndyCar series in 2025, there's really only one name you need to know, Alex Palou. And I'll tell you what, it's not a surprise to see him win, like you said, but in the manner that he did it. And you have to say it was just a masterful drive from him. You know, he came second here in 2021, and just because he was purely outclassed by a three-time then, now four-time winner in Helio Castroneves, and he's learned from that. He's suffered heartbreaks here in the last couple of years, and he's really become a great driver around this track. You know, when we talked about practice days, he was always on top of the leaderboards in some way, somehow. You know, and today, he just out-dueled everybody. You know, we had a very mixed-up grid like we talked about on Carb Day, and it got even more mixed up when a lot of the people that were towards the front that were going to be contenders ended up being befell with troubles of some sort, and, you know, it was basically him versus, you know, a bunch of surprises, potential surprises.
And one of those surprises, I would say, being Marcus Ericsson. He was really strong at the very beginning of the race, but fell into issues after the first round of pit stops, if I'm correct, where the car would not come off the jack. Cost him a lot of time, and they fuel strategied their way right back up to the front and came oh so close to giving up this win to Alex Palou, preventing Andretti from their first 500 win since 2017, and Marcus Ericsson's first win since he was last here with Ganassi in 22.
Yeah, that is a little bit of an irony that the two former Ganassi teammates were fighting each other at the end there. But, you know, Ericsson was kind of low-key strong throughout the month. He was the only Andretti representative in that Fast 12 shootout or Fast 9 shootout on pole day. And you know, he did fall back, but he came back forward, and his teammate Kyle Kirkwood did the same. So those Andretti cars were very strong. It's just one little misjudgment by Marcus Ericsson where, you know, he kind of got bound up by a couple cars that were on an alternative strategy and almost a lap down and kind of drafting with each other, two RL cars. You know, he dueled with Alex with about, I think it was like 15 to go. Alex got by, and Marcus just kind of laid and waited, and when he realized that Palou is going for it because they were on a similar strategy, he realized the mistake had started to hunt him down, and it was a little twitch on the north end of the track that kind of unseated it, and then we had a caution for Nolan Siegel crashing in turn 2 that kind of sealed the fate. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, and something that we haven't mentioned yet is Louis Foster, Devlin DeFrancesco were in front of the lead pack the final run of that race, and it definitely played an effect, I think, on Marcus Ericsson's chances. He was the third car in line. A lot of times we've heard the third car in line with these draft package has a hard time passing, and I think he was just in the wrong place at the wrong time, unfortunately. But he put himself in position, which Marcus Ericsson is known to do.
You know, one thing I'll add to that is, you know, I completely understand and can respect the whole thing of, you know, they're on the lead lap, trying to keep their laps, trying not to go a lap down, you know, fighting for position, all this. If it's 10 to go and you're fighting for like, what, 18th, 20th, they're outside the top 20. What are you really fighting for? It's two team cars, and you completely affected the final half of an Indy 500 just so you could have a incredible last lap pass for last. At some point, you have to understand, regardless if the blue flag's coming out, if it's under 10 to go, race ending under yellow, you're not going to go any better than where you were. And if a crash does happen, you're only going to go a lap down, so you'll still pass them regardless. So I don't know really what they thought to gain about that. I can understand the whole thing of, they're on the lead lap, they have a right to be where they are. But, I remember back in 2015, Justin Wilson was in that exact same position. You know what he did to not ruin the fight between Will Power and Juan Pablo Montoya? He got on the access lane and got out of the way. And I wish some of these drivers had the same thing, because this is the third time in the last 5 years that this has happened.
Yeah, and I want to kind of tack on a little note to that. We see a lot of this kind of running in practice. It did really much hamper down the last 20 laps or so of that race, to where the leaders were actually third and fourth in line behind those two cars. And we see a lot in practice here during that week of practice, where you'll see cars leading the pack and then they'll just fall back to the middle of it and then just charge their way back through. And, you'd think that you can't really gain too much data from that, but when it comes down to the Indy 500 win, you might be behind back markers. Another good instance of that was 2021 in the fight between Palou and Helio Castroneves.
And with that, obviously, there's a 200-lap race, 500 miles. There's a lot of highlights to go over. What did you see from where you were at up in the grandstands?
Well, it was a little bit of a track position race today for sure. It was a little bit difficult to pass at times. They seemed to kind of just get in a train course. We saw an insane first half of that race. Before we even got the command, we were on a rain delay there for just these annoying little spotty sprinkles. And then we finally got going, and before we even got the green flag, Scott McLaughlin, who already had a pretty tumultuous week after tubbing his primary car on pole day, the Penske controversy, coming to grips with a brand new car very late in the going, crashed it in the on the warm-up lap. He was just warming his tires and lost it on the front straightaway, and his race was over before it began.
Yeah, it's very reminiscent of Roberto Guerrero in 1992. I think that was the last time something like this happened.
On the pace laps, yes.
Yeah.
The last time I remember that was happening, I think it was either Scott Dixon or I want to say AJ Foyt the fourth.
Dixon did it in 2003. I remember.
Yeah,
that.
and then I think AJ Foyt the fourth in 08.
Probably.
Or 09. I think it was 09.
I don't know. That was a long time ago.
So, and then we barely got into the green flag running when all of a sudden the caution came right back out on lap number 4. They did start counting laps during that McLaughlin cleanup. But on lap number 4, the first green flag lap, we immediately went back to caution with Marco Andretti crashing in turn 1. I will say this, the restarts were insane, and the start itself was insane. Luckily, we got the traditional 3-wide start, but Marco just got pinched high and ended up in the wall, and that would be end of the day for him before it really even got going.
Yeah, and, we had everybody all cagey. We had the rain delay, and then we had the Scott McLaughlin and push everything back, and something I think everybody saw if you watched the race, it seemed like it was a lot harder to pass. It put so much more emphasis on those restarts and those starts. And I think that's why everyone was just going so hard, so crazy, because that was really your only opportunity, and put a lot of people in peril today.
And then another contender that, probably was one of the favorites for a lot of people going into this race was Scott Dixon. His race was also cut not prematurely short, but it was hampered pretty massively by a brake fire early on. The fire did extinguish itself, but the team was really hoping that there would be no lasting consequences. That car would actually have to come in and replace a rear caliper for the car, which set it back 3 laps, and that's something you really cannot recover from.
Yeah, it was unfortunate to see, of course, Dixon. If you're not picking Scott Dixon at the Indy 500, I don't know what you're doing. He's always a favorite, and just cannot seem to catch a break these days. Immediately had problems here today, didn't even have a chance.
And then kind of once we got going once again, we ended up getting stopped again for rain, and they ended up pacing around for a little bit. So the first 30 laps or so of this race was really stop, start, stop, start.
Yeah, it's, I guess, better than last year getting delayed, but, I feel like it's been a while since we've had a 500 like this where, you just can't seem to get going.
And then during that first round of pit stops, around that lap 30 mark when we were under caution for the rain, once we were getting set to go back racing, Ed Carpenter Racing did pull out an interesting strategy. They kept all 3 cars out, and they would keep them out until almost lap 70. really stretching their fuel window and taking advantage of all the yellow laps that we had. Unfortunately for the front runner of that ECR group, Alexander Rossi, his race would come to an end after that first stint where there was a leak in his fuel hose that ended up igniting, and he also had gearbox problems at that time as well, and Alexander Rossi's race was over before really it could settle into a nice rhythm.
Faster than the funny car, huh? I don't forget.
And then we fast forward to lap 82 with Rinus VK coming in for his second stop. He said that he was entering the pit lane and trying to get on the brakes, and there was just nothing there. And finally, there was something there. He had spun and hit the pit wall, and that would be the end of Dale Coyne Racing's day, as the other car from Jacob Abel didn't even make the show.
Yeah, the end of, honestly, a month that the Dale Coyne whole entire fleet wants to forget. You know, the 51 car misses the race, the 18 car barely gets in and struggles all race long. They had a couple good rounds at Barber and the Indy GP, but yeah, I think Dale Coyne definitely wants to get out of here.
And it would seem that pit lane would become kind of calamity corner, even though it's on the straightaway during this cycle, as longtime race leader Takuma Sato, someone who dominated the first chunk of the race, would overshoot his marks, and it would drop him to the middle of the pack, a place he would not recover from. And unfortunately, during that same exact moment, the Cinderella story for Robert Schwartzman would come to an end as he overshot his marks and collided with several of his pit crew members, damaging the front wing and front suspension, and Robert Schwartzman's day would prematurely come to an end on lap 82.
Yeah, going to Sato, it's really unfortunate to see. He does only the 500, and him coming in this strong with a team that struggles this much at the Speedway, being a favorite to win, being on the front row, dominating the first half of this race. It was heartbreaking to see. I think a lot of people in the stands and at home were disappointed, but a huge tip of the hat, you know, whatever. Congratulations to RLL Sato for doing such a great job and having a great month, even though it didn't end how they wanted it to.
And then we didn't get back to green much longer after that until we got to turn 2, when probably one of the fan favorites, Kyle Larson, would make a mistake, would just get too low, and while he was trying to correct, he clipped Kiffin Simpson, sent both of those cars into the wall, and then simultaneously trying to avoid that, Stingray Robb would brush the outside wall and end up in the tire barriers off of turn 2.
Yeah, and that's your Stingray Robb update for the day. He finished in, looks like 26th, unfortunately, after trying to avoid him. And he said that they didn't sweep the high line. They did sweep the middle line, but not the high line. So when he went high to avoid it, there was just nothing he could do. He almost had it, but just nowhere to go besides the tires after that.
And then that caution period would be extended out once again because of more sprinkles. And that would take us past the halfway mark. And when we finally did get back going, we would get a caution right at the restart because half the pack did not accelerate in the north chute like they would typically be supposed to. And Christian Rasmussen would spin the car, almost reminiscent of what he did in the first practice day, and he would be completely fine. He would escape any major damage, and the car would return to the race. However, they did have an unscheduled pit stop during that caution cycle, which set them back to the back of the pack once again.
Oh, yeah. Christian Rasmussen, he should go buy a lottery ticket. He has had 3 spins and hasn't really hit anything. So, yeah, go buy a lottery ticket if you're watching this.
Yeah, so 3 incidents, and 2 of those you didn't damage anything. So you know what? That's a pretty good record right there. And then we kind of get to the big one, Josef Newgarden. You know, that was the big story all month long, was the Penske penalty, the controversy behind that. Josef Newgarden, who started 32nd, just charged through the field. He made this track a 2-line track there for a little bit, pulling passes on the outside, and confidently he was asking his spotters if anyone else had tried it, and obviously the answer would be no on that one, but he was able to make a couple moves and make it stick. However, his rebound would be cut short with a fuel pressure problem that would see him retire from the race on lap 136.
Oh yeah, I knew after the qualifying penalty you couldn't count Josef Newgarden out of this race, and I think he proved that today. You know, with the talking point of the day, the difficulty to pass, we all said when we got back together after the race, that was with the exception of one car, and that was the number 2 car. He was the only guy who could pass on the outside, no less.
And then by the time he got about halfway through the race, you know, they said over the PA system that he asked the spotter, has anybody been able to make the outside work? So he, like, already by the halfway point of the race, he was ready to go make those moves. And, you know, I said this on Friday, and I was pretty close to being right. You know, if he was in the top 10, which he was for most of the day, with those timely cautions he had at the beginning of the race, that helped his fuel strategy get in the position where it needed to be, his pit crew was on fire all day long. It was insane how much time they were able to gain being that far back in the pit lane and still jumping about 5 cars on pit road, even having that much of a disadvantage. And, you know, if everything went right, I said this on Friday, and it would have been true. If he was in the top 20, in the top 10, in the final 20 laps, and there was a restart, hang on, because he was going to be hauling with how fast that car was. And, you know, he proved what he needed to prove. It hurts regardless. Obviously, this is a day or a month that Penske wants to forget. But I mean, I think Newgarden, if that didn't happen, he would have won this race, in my opinion.
Yeah, and when you think about this, he clawed from the very back of the grid, and he was in 7th at one point. And he was doing things that nobody else dared to do. You know, one thing I noted in the lead up to this on Carb Day in specific is how much downforce the Team Penske cars had on the front wings. You know, in this very aero-sensitive time, you know, all those little tidbits count. And they focused a lot on pack running. And Josef looked the most comfortable out of all those cars, being able to fall to the back of the pack and then slice his way back through. And he just did it time after time after time, you know, repeat, and it worked. And he got up there until that fuel pressure problem hit, and they would be lights out for the 2-time and defending champion today. Now, one thing I will say, with all of these big names that fell out of the race, these big expectations, we had names that we didn't expect come to the front. Now, names like Connor Daly and the Juncos Hollinger entry, you know, he's always really good here. And he proved it once again. He led a bunch of laps. His day would come undone because he stayed out on his tires a little bit too long, and the right rear just started coming apart on him, and he would fall from 2nd at the time where he was running when he had this issue all the way down to 8th or 9th, and he would not be able to recover. Another name, and this one was a little bit of a surprise to see up there in the later running, Ryan Hunter-Reay, the 2014 champion. Ryan is in a backup car, keep in mind, after that fire that happened on Carb Day. I have it on pretty good authority that tub was not exactly the best one. It's not the A choice to go to, but it's what they had, and they managed to drive it to the front, and it stayed there. And he looked to be a honest-to-God threat for the win today until, on his final pit stop, it stalled, and that would be day done for your 2014 winner.
And, you know, that really hurt because you said he would have had a shot. He had the race won. The strategy was perfect. The way that car was running up at the front with those 2 Rahal cars in front, you know, there was times where he pulled away from Palou, from Malukas, from Ferrucci, from Pato. And he was up there. He had this race won. You could see it, like, as soon as that happened, when that car stalled, Dreyer Reinbold standing on the box, heartbroken. You can see the crew guys on their knees with their arms against the wall, just in disbelief what just happened. And immediately what I thought about when I saw that happen in pit road was Sage Karam in 2018. He could have very well won that race, but he ran into issues when he hit the turn 4 wall. It's just, what does this team have to do? Because they've done it right. They got it figured out. And in a backup car that we believe is the Lotus chassis from 2012, like we talk about, you know, Dan Weldon's 2011 winner being a Marty Roth car. We talk about, the Dragon Speed car going to Elio's 4th win. A Lotus chassis that was allowed to go on the track for the race, winning the 500 almost 13 years later. Now, that would have been insane.
I want to point out something that Ryan Hunter-Reay that he was doing that I noticed. He was working with the 2 Rahal Letterman cars in front of him, and that little 3-car pack was actually pulling away from everybody else. So, you know, instead of them just being up there in front of the pack and just leading it, Ryan was working with them actively and building his lead off of it. Unfortunately, of course, it's a shame that it didn't really work out for Ryan today, but, you know, it just shows the masterclass that he still has and the potential he still has as a driver. And can you imagine the career arc he would have had, you know, coming out here as a one-off entry after all of his success through IndyCar with Andretti Autosport and going down and Dreyer Reinbold, a one-off team, and winning the race?
And, you know, one last thing I want to point out, and I told this to you and Cozy, who's over there behind the microphone, it's like, the crazy stat about this race is after Hunter-Reay was taken out of this race, if you look at the scorecard, as we know, Palou finished first, Ericsson finished second. What's important about that? The first car is sponsored by DHL. Second car is number 28, which was the combination on his car for his 2014 winner, which is just, you said it when I told this to you, this speed works in mysterious ways. How can you write that stuff? That the number and the sponsor finished 1-2 in the race that Hunter-Reay had wrapped up in his hand ready to take home.
Yeah, for sure. And, there's, I don't know, just something about this place that's always special in terms of how things like that work out. Another, very kind of meaningful thing that we saw today was kind of the redemption arc for David Malukas start to come full circle as well. If you remember back, he raced with Dale Coyne here. He was a pay driver with HMD, his dad's company, on the side pods. And then he got picked up by McLaren to be in that number 6 car before he had an injury. He was let go from them while recovering and replaced with Teo Pourchaire and then later Nolan Siegel. And here at Indy by Callum Ilott. And then he ends up the rest of the season at Meyershank Racing, replacing Tom Blomqvist, who was let go after this race. And then he finds himself at AJ Foyt Racing. And it was, a lot of people have been saying it's a pseudo setup for almost an audition for a Team Penske role in the future. And if today was a Team Penske audition, then he probably got the part because he performed masterfully. And he was my dark horse pick on Friday on Carb Day to win this race. And he was up there in contention along with his teammate Santino Ferrucci.
The one thing I want to add before we go into results, because I want to make sure I don't forget this, David Malukas, regardless of Marcus Ericsson, regardless of Ryan Hunter-Reay, regardless of Palou, Malukas is my driver of the race. He was perfect all day long. If you look back at the replay, you look at the scoring system, each lap that went by, he was there. He never left that top 3 throughout the entire running. The only time he was not in the top 3 was when you had the pit cycle going around where you had those front runners that were on a different strategy. But even then, on his strategy, he was there up in second, riding behind regardless of whether or not it was Takuma Sato, and then it was Hunter-Reay, and then it was Palou, and then it turned out to be Ericsson. He was there the entire time. And you want to talk about guys who could pass? Towards the end of that race, Malukas found the confidence to try things. He was down on the grass. He was up against the wall. He was finding every which way that he can make passes on this racetrack. So we talk about guys who, has a 500 win coming. We know but that Palou was on that list. Pato is still on that list. Santino's on that list. Malukas is definitely on the list. Even if he comes back here next year with the AJ Foyt cars, who are so strong today. Santino Ferrucci, a guy that we counted out. A lot of people counted out the thing that this was going to be the race that in his top 10 streak, he almost had a top 5 finish, and he was in the contention to get that win. Even if he comes back here with an AJ Foyt car, Malukas is going to be just as strong. If he comes back with a Penske, look out. It's going to be insane.
Yeah, absolutely. And, we all know how great Malukas has been at Gateway through, the years that he's raced there and how spectacular he's just been on ovals, particularly short ovals. But he never has really had a chance to flex his muscles here at IMS. And he finally got that chance today. I know this in qualifying, that he was brave enough to go out there with no diffuser strakes in qualifying, to have that wing tilted back after everybody else had crashed. And the Fast 9, or Fast 12, same thing, I guess. Yeah. But they all put the diffuser strakes back on. They cranked wing back into it to kind of not throw stuff at the wall. Malukas went out there like nothing had happened, like nothing had affected it. Any thoughts on Malukas?
He is also my driver of the day. Foyt team's my team of the day almost. Ever since Michael Cannon was at that team, they just showed up with speed here. They put Benjamin Peterson in the Fast 9, of course Santino. And ever since Michael Cannon left, there's been some questions of Foyt could keep it up. And they backed it up today. They brought in Santino, he looked great. And of course, David Malukas, I think he stole the show. A lot of people probably know who he is now if they didn't know who he was before. Like you mentioned, Gateway, he's always been good there. And it was really cool to see him flex his muscle somewhere else. Gateway, over the last couple of years, I've seen him some fantastic racecraft. We saw that today. I 100% agree. He is on the going to win a 500 list for sure.
All right, well, with that being said, all we have left now is the results. So we're going to look at the rundown of your 109th running of the Indianapolis 500. But first, let's go to a word from our friends over at Peak Performance.
Protect your vehicle with Peak Original Equipment Technology. Our formulas match the vehicle manufacturer's technology requirements so that we have the perfect match for every vehicle.
And as we mentioned at the top of the video, Alex Palou finally gets his first win on an oval, and it is on the biggest stage here at the Indy 500. He will beat his former teammate Marcus Ericsson to the line. In third place, David Malukas in his AJ Foyt Racing entry. In fourth place, the questions will continue for another year for Pato Award as he brings home his Aero McLaren entry, which at times did not look so great, but he did have one spectacular moment going into turn number 3. But unfortunately, beyond that, it was just kind of an average race for him. In fifth place, Felix Rosenquist, one of the favorites in his Meyer-Shank Racing Honda. Sixth place, a great rebound from Kyle Kirkwood. In seventh, Santino Ferrucci in his AJ Foyt Racing Chevrolet. In eighth place, a nice recovery from his spin early on in the race for Christian Rasmussen. Ninth place, Christian Lundgaard, and rounding out your top 10, hometown favorite, Connor Daly.
Finishing in 11th is going to be the number 75 with Takuma Sato, who had the most dominant car all day long until a mistake on pit road cost him his shot at a third Indianapolis 500. Finishing 12th is going to be the second perma entry of Callum Ilaw, who quietly had an incredible day start to finish, was running up there in the top 5, had a shot at a top 10 finish, came short in 12th. 13th, Elio Castroneva, someone who was running up in the top 10 towards the end of the race, faded back into 13th, which is where about he was at for most of the race. He ends up in the 13th spot. Delvin DiFrancesco in 14th with Louis Foster in 15th. They battled it out for that 14th spot and blocked the leaders of the 500. 16th, Nolan Siegel, who crashed out on the final lap to bring out the last caution to secure Alex Palou to win. Colton Herta, who had no speed all race long, finishes in 17th. Ed Carpenter, who had a strong start to the race, was an Ed Carpenter Racing 1-2-3 at the beginning portion of the race. He fades back to 18th. Will Power, the sole Team Penske car after a disappointing month of May for the team that started off so strong. They finished 19th, and Graham Rahal, who basically just puttered his way around the racetrack for the entire day. This is a month of May he's going to want to forget. Another one to add to the list. He rounds out in the 20th position, just surviving the race.
Marcus Armstrong finishes in 21st, with Jack Harvey bringing home the second Dreyer Reinbold entry in 22nd. Scott Dixon, the 2008 winner of the Indy 500, finishes in 23rd, being the last running car, besides Nolan Siegel, at the finish. Finishing in 24th was Ryan Hunter-Reay. 25th, Josef Newgarden. 26th, one of our favorite drivers on the Mighty Mac channel, Stingray Robb. Finishing in 27th, couldn't complete the 1,100 miles. Once again, unfortunately, Kyle Larson. 28th, the number 8 of Kiffin Simpson, having a pretty rough month of May. Finishing in 29th, the pole sitter from Israel, Robert Schwartzman, brings home his Prema car after a very rough race day. Rinus VeeKay finishes in 30 after a day that the whole team is going to want to forget. And Alexander Rossi, also on that ship, finishing in 31st, wanting to forget a rough day at the Indy 500. Marco Andretti finishes in 32nd after barely making it through the first corner, and Scott McLaughlin rounds out your field, not even taking the start after crashing on the warm-up laps.
So that is going to wrap up our coverage of the 109th running of the Indianapolis 500, and of course ends the 2025 edition of the month of May. Guys, we've been here since the start of the Grand Prix. We were out in Chicago for Route 66 Nationals. This has been a hectic last for 2.5 weeks, I would say. Final thoughts before we close out the month of May.
Well, the month of May always feels like a year, and I just kind of had a moment to think about this. The month of May for Alex Palou felt like the month of May that Marcus Ericsson had here in 2022. Always up there, but under the radar. He wasn't making headlines. He wasn't smashing records, but he was there, and he was there when he needed to be. You know, in the way that we expected an Alex Palou win, this wasn't it. We would have expected him to lead 150 plus laps and be 15 seconds ahead of the field. This wasn't it. So, you know, all the props to him. I mean, he deserved it. He was going to get it one day, and how fitting that his first oval win comes here.
Yeah, absolutely. The month of May it's the best month as a race fan. You know, you get F1, you get drag racing, you get NASCAR, you get IndyCar, and I'm had a bunch of great races. Alex Palou, he had probably the best month of May of anybody, winning Barber, Indy. He swept the entire month of May, not just the month of May here. So absolutely fantastic month of May for Alex Palou. I think he's going to keep this momentum going. But month of May is the best month there is.
You know, someone mentioned the media center. I'm not sure exactly how accurate this statement is, but apparently with the points that they are now, because of the fact this was a double points race, the gap from first to second in the points is greater than the gap from second to last in the standings, because of the fact that Alex Palou has won 5 out of the 6 races, and the worst finish he's had is a second. So start engraving names on the championship trophy. It's going to end before we even get to Milwaukee. It's going to end before we get to Laguna Seca. I mean, talk about the month of May. I mean, obviously, you know, Palou sweeping the entire month of May, including Barber. You add on to the fact, you know, the chaos of this month. You know, Schwartzman winning the pole as a rookie. You go to the NHRA side at Route 66. Tony Stewart winning his first 2-wide drag race ever in his career after winning the 4-wide at Vegas earlier in the year. He ends the one race in May scoring his first ever 2-wide normal drag racing event. Jack Beckman as well, and then, you know, the Gage Herrera, Matt Smith beef continuing. I mean, the month of May brings magic no matter where you are, and this was magic personified with how just insane this month of May was, and to cap it off with this race, with the way it ended, with the way that the storylines turned out, with all the favorites that we had going into this race pretty much fading by the wayside before we even got halfway through this race. I mean, Sato getting taken out because of a pit stop mistake. Ryan Hunter-Reay, heartbreak again. Paddle Ward, we didn't really see much of him at all through the race. We saw one glimpse of hope out of him, and then it faded quicker than Connor Daly's chances of winning this race. So, I mean, what else can you say? This is just an insane month of May.
And I want to point out one last thing. This kind of dominance, we've seen it before from the number 10 team. We've seen it before when Dario Franchitti was behind the wheel of that car. And yes, maybe Alex Palou is maybe one level above that because there was always willpower in his prime to counter Dario. But we have to keep in mind, though, that for that 10 team, this is long overdue because that car went through a 6-year stretch where it did not see victory lane. The last driver to take it to victory lane before Rosenquist took it in 2020 was Tony Kanaan in 2014 at Fontana. But besides that, it was Scott Dixon carrying the Chip Ganassi team through all the wins through those years. So for that 10 team, for Ricky Davis, for Barry Wanzer, this has been kind of their revenge tour for those tough years.
You know, something to just think about as well. We remember back in our childhoods coming into the Speedway, the 10 car was so dominant year after year with Dreyer Reinbold. Before that with Dan Weldon, and then went through that stretch where we just didn't really see the performance of this car that we grew up seeing. This is the first time in 13 years that the 10 team has won the 500, and the first time in 15 that the number 10 actually went to victory lane. So this has a lot of implications for that entire team, which is why I think when you look at Alex celebrating the way he did, I don't think the emotion was pretty much just himself. I think it was the realization for that entire team of what they had just accomplished, considering the drought that you mentioned that they had to go through to get back to this point.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, if you grew up around the time we did, that's the car you remember, is the 10 car, the 12 car, the 9 car, but mainly the 10 car. And for me, the main difference now is that I'm appreciating what's going on. I realize we are witnessing history, one of the best seasons in modern racing overall. I mean, I said it during the GP. Jimmy Johnson, Max Verstappen, I'm throwing those names out with this. It's not just Alex Palou, it's the entire 10 team, and I think today, this whole season has showed that, but today was the explanation point on what they've already been doing this season.
You know, to wrap all this up, I mean, the last stat to think about, someone mentioned in the media center during Palou's press conference. In the modern era of IndyCar, there's only 2 other drivers that have won 5 out of 6 races. That was Al Unser Sr. and AJ Foyt. Palou is standing in unprecedented status of history. It's insane.
Especially in kind of the modern spec times. You know, we talk about dominance by, you look at Red Bull the last couple of years with that rule set. You look at WEC this year with Ferrari in the hypercar. But they're competing against cars that are completely different. They're competing against different designs, different engines, all that stuff. Here, I mean, you look up and down the grid, the cars are virtually the same, minus the engines and, of course, some of the setup things. So for him to be this dominant in this day and age in modern IndyCar racing, where most things are equal, is unbelievable.
And with that, that's going to wrap up our coverage of the 109th edition of the Indianapolis 500 and, of course, our month of May content. Thank you to everyone who watched all month long. We started getting noticed here at the Speedway for the 500. And we're, of course, getting a growing presence at the drag strips as well. So we have a lot to look forward to here in the coming months as we get set for the summer months of the NHRA Tour, brought to you, of course, by our friends at Peak Performance. Thank you guys so much to them for supporting us through all of this and allowing us the opportunity to come out here and comfortably do this stuff without having to worry too much. We have a lot to look forward to with them. We had a great weekend out in Chicago with them, and we're going to have an even greater summer months as we get set for the big races of Bristol, Norwalk, and of course, all leading up to the end of the countdown with the big go, the U.S. Nationals. By the way, I saw Don Prudhomme walking the track today. That was a fun experience. So, of course, that's going to wrap up our coverage. Thank you guys so much for watching. Be sure to subscribe down below, like the video, comment what you thought of the Indianapolis 500. And again, thank you to our friends at Peak Performance. And until next time, which I'm hoping is going to be the Epping Nationals here in a couple weeks, this is Mac. We'll see you next time.